Alcoholic Mark Still. It is now my pleasure to introduce our main speaker, Bob from Chino.
My name's Bob Bro, and I'm an alcoholic. It's good to be here and good to be sober. I'd like to thank my friend Bruce for asking me to come out and share with the group, and it's a privilege to be here. You know, it was 95 degrees when we left, and it keeps going down and down, and I'm like, I'm liking this, right? And I get here, and it's great. I mean, I think it was last Sunday night I talked in a meeting, and I was starting to strip my clothes off. It was getting so hot, right? I didn't know what to do. Probably 25 years ago, some of the girls would get excited. Now they're like scaring them and shit, you know? And I got sober in the sobriety capital of the world, and if you don't know where that is, it's Covina, California, the fabulous 502 Club. AKA who's on who at the 502. I wasn't that bad. I could sum it up. I'd sit here and tell you a story. You know, there's one of the great stories in the back of our book is Sylvia Kaufman wrote a story that was fantastic, and it's called Keys to the Kingdom. And you know, on the end of that story, she says she talked about no longer being lonely or frightened or afraid, or and then she says, I traded a bottle and a hangover for the keys to the kingdom. And I could sum up whatever I'm going to tell you here tonight with that one statement, because that's been my story. You know, I got sober on May 16th in 1988 at the fabulous 502 Club, and I didn't know on that Tuesday night what was going to happen to me. Hell, I didn't know. You know, Carla was talking about how some of those people were. I mean, I see people are all nice and lovey-dovey handing out teddy bears. I was getting stuff like, where are we going? They shut up and get in the car, and I'm like, yeah, okay, Things changed a lot. I don't know if it's the easier, softer Alcoholics Anonymous or what, but I'm still like that. So, if you're around me outside of here and you're talking about something new, you're not going to pass it over on me. I'll start laughing at you and tell you the truth the best I know it, like they did to me. They love me enough to tell me the truth, and probably is a good reason why I'm still here. I don't know. But the fabulous 502 Club in those days, I mean, it was thriving, and there was a bunch of crazy people running around. People, my first sponsor, my grand sponsor, was a little guy named Harvey Andrews, and him and I became really good friends. And he did archives in Los Angeles. We didn't have them in Riverside yet then. And I owned a printing company, I still do, and he'd come over and we'd make film out of all these historic documents of Alcoholics Anonymous. But Harvey, I was having problems, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but when if I see new people that are happy, welcome to all the new people. If you got a drinking problem, this is a good place to be. But I was in divorce court, imagine that. I had one wife that was divorcing me that I was married to, and the first one, they hated each other, but they teamed up and they were coming after me. But I'd been in court the week before with one of them, and my lawyer said, you need to stay out here, because if you go in there, he's going to remember you from last week, and that's not going to be good for your cases, So I did what I was told, and I sat there, and my serenity was wearing out. I'd been in there about 45 minutes, and I look up, and around the corner, here comes this little guy. I'm like, that's Harvey. That's that guy. He's my grand sponsor, right? And he comes walking up. He says, hey, kid. He says, how you doing? I says, well, I'm doing all right. And he sat down next to me, one drunk talking to another. I was crawling out of my skin. I was probably, I don't know, not long, 4 months sober or something. And, by the time he got to the story of, I think it was his 7th wife or 8th wife, I knew I was going to be fine, right? And, they used to joke and say, you don't need to be a serial marrier to be an Alcoholics Anonymous, but there's a lot that are, I guess. I don't know. I was born in East Los Angeles, and I grew up in South El Monte, and I don't know if you know where that is. It was rough, and I went to Catholic school the first 4 years that I was in school, and I remember when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I used to go to the noon meeting, and I'd hear something that sounded good, and then I'd go to the night meeting and parrot it off like it was some kind of magical wisdom that I picked up somewhere. And I was in the meeting one night, and I heard somebody say something in the noon meeting, and I was repeating it in the evening. I said, I'm Bob, I'm an alcoholic, and I'm a recovering Catholic. And my sponsor was, George was in there, and he looked at me, he didn't say it, and he comes up to me after the meeting, and I don't know how long I was sober, 6, 8 months, it was a long time ago, but he goes, man, kid, he goes, you're sounding really good. How long you been sober? And I told him whatever it was. He said, hey, why don't you come over to my house tomorrow around 2 o'clock, we need to talk. And I says, yeah, okay. So I go over to George's house, and we're sitting in the study where, I did my inventory and a lot of other stuff. I'd go over there to his house, and he's talking to me, and he says, about that recovering Catholic thing. He goes, I want to talk about that. And I says, oh, yeah, well, I went to Catholic school for 4 years. The nuns used to hit me with rulers, and, I had all these sob stories. And he said, open up your book. He says, open up your book to page 87. And he points at it, and he goes, read this out loud. And I picked it up, and I'm reading it. It says, be quick to see where religious people are right. And then he says, and read the next sentence. That's a good one for you to read. And he says, and make use of what they have to offer. And it's been 36 years. I don't say that anymore. It didn't work. It didn't work then. It didn't work now. If I could have found any other excuse, my mom being an LA County sheriff, I could give you a list of all the reasons, until I was out of reasons and my scorecard read 0, until I was ready to admit complete defeat. I wasn't going to come here and obtain and maintain sobriety and do a few simple things that were impossible for a person like myself to do at the time I rolled into Alcoholics Anonymous. I'll tell you a little about how I really am. When I was 8 years old, my mom used to take me over to my grandma's all the time, me and my little brother and sister. I'm the oldest of 3, and I'm 8 years old. And I'm down over in Temple City, and I'm at the department store. I'm with my grandma, and I'm pushing the shopping cart. Just minding my own business with my grandma. I'll never forget. These 2 little girls, they come up and they're pointing at me going, look at him, look at him. Now, when I was 8, I was about 5'10". I probably weighed about 80 pounds, right? I had a shaved head. I had buck teeth that stuck straight out, big as my face, and freckles. And they're, look at him, and I'm freaking out. I knew they knew how I felt inside. I knew they knew how I felt. And my grandma looks over and she says, oh, Bobby, don't worry. They're just kidding, Right. I was 8 years old, and when I got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, I was 33. I was 6 or 7 weeks sober, and I was going over to that George guy's house and sitting in his, and we're reading that book. And, we got to the part where me and him are on our knees, and we're reading the 3rd step prayer on page 63 in our book. And then he flips it over, and he says, read this, and it says something like, this crucial and vital step will have little long-lasting effect unless followed at once by a rigorous course of action, house cleaning. So he starts showing me how to do an inventory, and he takes a piece of paper, and he basically draws 3 lines on it. And, I've seen computer programs and workbooks, and I don't know, it's pretty simple in our book, on page 65, except they fool you. The 4th column's a couple more pages. He fooled me too. Anyways, he dries that over. He goes, over here, I want you to write who or what. I want you to write the cause, and then I want you to write, affects my. Does it affect, your personal relations, your financial ambition, your sex relations? And so he tells me that, and he goes, in this 4th column, I want to know your part. And I says, well, there's not that here. And he goes, flip it over. And he goes, now read this. He says, where have I been selfish, self-seeking, self-centered, or frightened? He goes, ask yourself those questions about these resentments you have. Yeah, all right. So I start writing an inventory. I got to tell you guys something. Ahead of my mother, right on the top of that first one, the who and what, it was those 2 little girls. It had been 25 years since they'd been pointing at me. And I don't know about you, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous says the alcoholic's problem centers in the mind. And, that's why I'm here tonight. The alcohol problem's been removed. I have a thinking problem. I had it the whole time, had it before I got here. You take away my magic elixir, and all of a sudden I'm stuck, raving sober. I used to describe it as I'm standing out on I-10 butt naked, and they're driving by real slow pointing, But, right on the top of the first page is those 2 little girls, and I'll tell you something. It'd been 25 years, but I got 5 senses, and the thing is, they're all connected to the problem, and that's why I need you. That's why I need to be active in and part of Alcoholics Anonymous, no matter how long I've been here. I need you more now than I did when I rolled in here 36 and change ago. It's just what it is. But I'll tell you something else. It's been 60 years since those 2 little bitches pointed at me, and I still think about them sometimes. 11 years old, the neighbor kid comes over, and he's like, we're going to we moved to Covina by then, I was 11. we're going to Covina or the Azusa Drive-In. All right, so I get in the back. Now his uncle was here. He was an adult. We were kids. We were 11, 12, and we're going to the Foothill Drive-In Theater. And his uncle's here from Idaho. His name, I saw him at one of my reunions, and I said, your uncle, I've told this story thousands of times all over the place, and I said, what was his name? He says, his name was Willie. We called him Crazy Willie. And I go, oh, that's good. That's good material for this story. And I said, it's the truth. It's even better, right? So, you know, we're driving to the theater, and he says, you guys want something to drink? He pulls in this liquor store. It's funny because this liquor store is right across the street from where my office has been now for 45 years in Covina, right? It's there. I get to think about it every time I see Firebird Liquor, right? He pulled in there. He says, what do you guys want? And I was the last of the 3 kids in the car, and I said, I'll take 2 cans of Colt 45 and a half pint of vodka. And he went in there. You know, I was 11, but I'd had some time to plan. And I had to wait to be the last one, the third. Anyways, I look down here, I see the keys to the kingdom. Anyways, he comes out a big bag. We go to the theater, you know, and we're in the back. I'm sitting in the back seat. This guy next to me starts turning a little bit blue. He starts projectile vomiting right down the neck of this Crazy Willie guy, the only adult. And Crazy Willie, now he gets a little intense. Now, I was in this little car. It was a Valiant, and I remember that it had push buttons on the dashboard. He fired that sucker up, and he take off, and we're going up and down over the bumps like, out of here, right? And I look over, and I'm like, what's going on? I look over, and the speaker's still hanging in the window. The wire's dangling out the back, and we're rolling. We went across the street, and they proceeded to clean up Rick, the guy next to me, and I'm sitting in the back, and I thought, I needed a pee is what it was. I get out of the back. I'd been back there a couple hours. And last thing I remember, I put my hand on the lid of that car, and the next thing I know, I'm coming to on this asphalt parking lot with my pants around my ankles, rolling in my own pee and puke, you know. And I got to tell you guys, I was 11 years old. It was the first time that happened, but it sure as heck wasn't the last time that it happened. I got to sit here and tell you I started doing that every day, but I woke up, came to in the morning, and, you know, it was kind of a fog. It was kind of like deja vu, and I'm thinking about the way it made me feel, the magic that I got when that stuff went into me. It was like crazy, like something I couldn't ever describe. I mean, you know, those little girls could have pointed at me and I would have been laughing at them. You know, all my differences were gone. You know, I was like one with the universe, right? And the next thing in my head is like, when do I get to do it again? And I just continued that on and on and on till I rolled in here, you know, 22 years later. And it just got worse and worse and worse. I mean, I sit here and tell you I didn't have fun. I had a ball, you know. It's like one of my friends, Tom, says, you know, fun with problems, and then just pure problems. And that's what happened with me. I spent a long time doing stuff thinking it'd get different. You know, in high school, I was like on the honor roll. I had really high marks. They said I was gifted or something, you know. But they're always throwing me out of school. They said I had an antisocial behavior, and I used to really like to make teachers cry. You know, and I tell you something, I got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous about 9 months sober, and I was over at the Fabulous 502 Club, and this lady was talking. She said her name was Joyce, and she was an alcoholic. And I heard Joyce's story. And I'm sitting next to my sponsor in the front row, and she's telling her story. And I'm looking at this. She was a little old lady, and I'm looking at her, I'm thinking, oh my God, she was one of those teachers I did that to. Like, she had been my English teacher from 6th grade, you know. So she gets done talking, and she gets down, and I'm standing in the greeting, I'm trying to thank her. And then I said, you know, I think you were my teacher in 6th grade. And I said, I think I owe you an amends. I didn't act too well there. And she didn't even remember me. She knew a bunch of my friends, though. Can you believe that? I felt bad. I figured I could have done a better job than I did on her. You know, I had a friend in high school that moved away, and I got out of high school early, and my friend moved down to a place called Cardiff by the Sea in North County, San Diego. Kevin lived there with his brother and his dad was always gone. And I used to go down there, and I'd be surfing in the water with them, and we'd surf and stay there at a trailer right on the seawall there. And we'd be out drinking and doing other stuff and surfing and, you know, just living the life. And, you know, a few months later, they come in, the state tore out the parking, turned into a parking lot, right? And I'm like, what am I going to do? And it's like the end of May. And right below Cardiff is Solana Beach. There's a bluff that goes up, and then after that's Del Mar. But there's a big cove there, and in the cove was these big caves. You know, and I was like 18 years old. I don't think I was even 19 yet. I took up residence in this cave, you know. And I didn't have a car. I used to hitchhike around. And, you know, it sounds kind of remote or rough or whatever. It's the best part of my life, man. I live in this cave. I'm in the water surfing whenever I want to. I'm out on the beach looking for girls with ice chests. You know, I mean, one of them even I met they owned a big house up on the bluff up there. I was set up. And, you know, I hitchhiked back to Covina once, and I wanted to see some of my friends. It'd been a few months, and I go over there, and they go, dude, where have you been? And I'm like, hey, man, I got beachfront property, right? I told them I had a maid. You know, if you're familiar with the tidal movement of the Pacific Ocean, it goes up and down twice a day, depending on the moon cycle. And the problem with that is the maid would come in unannounced at 2 when I was passed out in my sleeping bag inside that cave and take me out to sea. You know, I'd come to underwater, you know. Stupid. It started getting cold at the end of November, beginning of December. I went back to Covina, and me and 2 of my friends that are both gone, they died hideous alcoholic deaths, Ron and Ron. We broke into this boarded up Vitapack citrus packing thing right on the railway, which is now Metrolink. In those days, there was no activity. And I lived in there a year and a half. And, you know, that was, you know, more of the same. You know, I didn't care about anything. I got a job at some little printing company, and I'd go there and work. And all my money, I didn't have any bills, so all my money, I'd go over there and get 2, they call them 40s now, right? I don't know what it was in those days. It was a long time ago. But, you know, I'd have those and all the other stuff. You know, I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and I could sit here and have a whole talk on, you know, watching spaceships and paint dry and all that good stuff. That's all part of my history, too. But I'd get those 2 bottles and go home, and that was all my life consisted of, you know. Ended up I got a little house about 2 blocks. It was on South 2nd Street. It was about, quarter of a mile from where I was going to end up getting sober. I was 23 years old. I ended up buying that house. The lady, I'd started this little company, this little printing company, and I was making a little money. I was making more money doing my illegal activity, if you know what I'm talking about. And I sold that house when I was 24 years old. I took a chunk of money, and I went up and bought a 5-bedroom house in Villa Verde, the hills over there on the golf course. So I'm 24. I got this girl I'm living with. I think, yeah, we were married by then. You know, she was one of my best friend's girls, and she came over one day, and I told Ron and Ron, they were still alive then, I said, someday she's going to be mine, and she did, and we hooked up, and, you know, it was like not a vision for you, and it was a relationship made in hell. You know, I used to think that stuff was exciting, you know. I mean, really I did, and, you know, that's how sick I was. I didn't know. And so we're living up in this big house up in the hills, and, you know, I'm doing a lot of bad stuff and rolling. I'm rolling the money. I'm driving around in this little cherry Mustang coupe I had, and I got a 9mm with 31 rounds in the clip under the seat. I thought I was Rambo, you know. I mean, I'd done some inventory work, and I was a scared punk is what I was. Thought I was a badass, you know. I'm driving around, doing crazy stuff, and lo and behold, you know, that gal, she ended up taking off with my best friend. Can you believe that? You know, I was about 6 or 7 years sober, and my wife was with me. You know, she used to go with me when I used to talk all over the place, and she had one of her girls with her that she sponsored, and the girl comes up to me after the meeting. She goes, you know, Bob, you were talking about that gal, your first wife. And I go, yeah. He says, she was your friend's girl. I said, yeah, and then you ended up hooking up with her and marrying her and having a little girl. She says, isn't it funny what goes around comes around? And, you know, and I never thought of it like that, you know. I just thought I was a victim of poor circumstance. And, yeah, I lost that house. All that stuff blew up. And, you know, she took off with that guy, and I had a little girl. You know, I used to always think, if I have a kid, I'll do the right thing. I'll quit acting like this. I'll do the right thing because I know I'll be a good dad. And you know what? You put more pressure on a person like me, and I get thirstier and crazier. Actually, crazier and thirstier in that order, you know. But That little girl was beautiful, and I was actively involved in her life. And, after that, I was always going out to bars. I started getting in trouble. I got drunk driving, it was horrible. I never did that. I was always locked down because of the kind of business I was doing. I couldn't be out in public a lot. And I became public, and I was outdoors, and I was getting sloppy doing stupid stuff. And, I went to jail for that. But shortly after that, I met this gal. I had this client, this little printing business I'd started. And this little blonde, her daughter comes out. And I don't know about you, and there's always been a lot of women and women friends in my life. But there's something about it, like when I'm living like that. It's like when you watch that Top Gun movie, how those jets are chasing each other and the infrared locks on what's in the heat signature in front of it, and then they blow it out of the sky? Well, it's like that with me. I mean, I could sit here and close my eyes right now, and I could pick out the sickest woman in this whole room. There might even be 2 or 3 here tonight, I know. Yeah, you can't hide from me. But that's the way I'm living. And, I used to describe it as when you go to the racetrack, like over here at Santa Anita, they got pick 6. Well, I call it pick sick, and I wonder why it works that way. These guys call me all the time. There's a whole bunch of them. You know what I hear about? The 2 common denominators, romance and finance, them 2 things. In Men's Stags, I got 2 other, I can't say. Romance and finance, right? And they're talking about, they got work problems, money problems, they got relationship problems, This guy will tell me about this stuff, and I say, well, geez, that sounds like some red flags to me. Maybe you need to write an inventory on her. And then every time, but I love her! The women shouldn't laugh. My wife sponsors a lot of women. I hear they're worse. Yeah. But I love her. Yeah, all the way to the grave. It's not exciting anymore, That little gal could drink me under the table, and we'd been together a little while, and she got pregnant somehow, and she was out to here with what's now my 36-year-old son. I was with him today, and his son, one of my grandkids. I got 10. She left. She kept telling me, I'm not going to raise a kid around you. You run around in these cars with bags full of money and guns. You hang around with crazy people. You pass out on the ground. You wet your pants. You're disgusting. And I looked at her and I says, but you drink more than I do. Deflection. I came home one day and I thought somebody robbed my house. I get into the house, there's nothing there. My clothes are there. She didn't want those. Smartest thing she ever did, she got the hell away from me. Shortly after that, for the first time, I started trying to control my drinking. Now, I can control my drinking. I'd never tried, but I started to, but I surely can't enjoy it and control it at once. I've got this doctor I'm going to. I've been going to him for years. I'm bleeding out of the back, bleeding out of the front, chronic bronchitis, walking pneumonia, whatever. And I'd go in there, and he'd pull out this big folder on me. And he'd look at me and he'd say, are you done yet? And I said, done with what? And he says, you don't get it. Well, in February of 1988, I whirled in there. And I went in there and I was dragging and I was sick. I was really sick. And he says, I said, I can't live like this anymore. And he calls in the nurse, same thing, writes something down. And in the old days, they'd give you shots. They didn't have none of that stuff like they got now, the Z-Packs or whatever. They come in, you get a shot, which was good because they worked really good. And they'd come in, and I'd say, take your pants down. And they'd stick me with, B12 on one side and stick me with ampicillin. That B12 is like hot lead going on my rear end. But let me tell you something. Give me 3 or 4 hours, let's go. That stuff worked good. And I'd be back down in Marina Del Rey running around, sniffing around with, me and one of my buddies. And that day I got those 2 shots and he started talking to me. He says, you're done, what's that mean? I says, I can't drink and do the other stuff I'm doing anymore. And he says to me, have you ever heard of Alcoholics Anonymous? And that was on a Tuesday. And that evening I found myself in the fabulous 502 Club in what used to be the Al-Anon room next to the big room. And I walked in there that night, and if you're new or fairly new, I'll tell you how when I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous, what it was like. I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was staring at the ground, and people were coming up to me, and all I seen was shoes and hands, and shoes and hands. That's all I was seeing, Hey, my name's Jim. I'm an alcoholic. Are you new? Yeah, I'm Bob. Hey, I'm John. I see these people coming up to me. I could tell you they had a pair of Adidas shoes on. You know, that was about it. I didn't know what they looked like. I couldn't look you in the eye. And I sat as far back in the corner because I didn't want to draw any attention to my situation. I had sweat running down both my sides, and I was just vibrating. Now, from February of 1988 till May of 1988, during that 3-month period of time when I was getting ready to come and see you, what I forgot to tell you is that doctor, he said, you're going to have problems if you stop drinking. He asked me if I was going to stop. I said, why? Have you ever stopped? Why? And he writes out a prescription. I'm not a prescription drug kind of guy, but it said, take 1 up to 2 times daily as needed, Librium, 25 milligrams, and he gave me a bottle with 200 in it. Now, I didn't know what that was. I goes to have this strange phenomenon that's happening to me. I'll be sitting there and I'm thinking about my ex-wives in the IRS and all the things I had hanging on me, and, you know, I'd start, chest be getting tight, hair in the back of my neck standing up, I'm turning red like a radish, I can't breathe, and I ain't drinking. And I'm like screaming at God, that, you know, those nuns showed me, and screaming at it because I'm not drinking. I deserve better. And because I thought if I put the plug in the jug, everything would go away. Everybody around me behave. It was going to be fine. But what happened with those pills was I'd start thinking I was going to have one of those attacks, and, you know, take 1 up to 2 times daily as needed. That's for, you know, that's for practice. Well, you know, I'd take 6 or 8 of them, and I'd throw them down, and you know, ex-wife's the IRS guy, I'm start going crazy. And in about 30, 45 minutes, I'd just be like, bleh, like Gumby. And I'm not a doctor, but I'll tell you what I experienced. What I experienced was the stuff going on, the anxiety attacks would go away. I didn't even know what they were. I heard that term in a panel I did one time. I'm like, that's what I thought I was going to die. But anyways, it wouldn't turn off my head. You see, I didn't understand what's on page 23 in our book, what I talked about earlier. The Alcoholics' Problem Centers in the Mind. I didn't know that. I didn't know that's why I couldn't get sober or stay sober. I didn't know that. I didn't know that all these things that were piling up on me were all a direct connection to my mind. I wouldn't tell you that. I'm smart. They said I have an extremely high IQ. Oh, really? Why do you wet your pants? You know? So, like in my work, I do math all day. Math. I've been doing it for years. I'm pretty good at it, I guess. You know, I'm a multi-engine, instrument-rated pilot. That means I can put people in the back of an airplane and fly in the clouds for a long ways. And that takes a lot of math. A lot of math. And if the math's wrong, I'll die. And so it's important. But when it came to my math with that bottle of pills, I had a hell of a time. I was having problems with my onesies and twosies. They became 8s and 10s. Boom. So the second batch of those pills that I get from the doctor, he says, this is the last ones you're ever going to get to me. Did you ever go to Alcoholics Anonymous? Well, I hadn't. So from February to May of 1988, I'll tell you if you're new or fairly new what was happening to me. You know, on page 21 of the 12 and 12, the first line says, who cares to admit complete defeat? And my first sponsor, George, he told me, you need to read these every day. He goes, you're a smart one. You need to read these. And so I'd read that. And I'm okay. I'm an alcoholic. So what? Let's party. No big deal. Everybody around me is. You know, I'm the guy they're looking for at 2 in the morning to re-up. You know? So what? You know? My problem and what I learned during that 90-day period of time was my life is unmanageable. Who cares to admit complete defeat? I wouldn't throw in the towel. I wouldn't do it. And so, you know, on May 16th, that Tuesday night, when I rolled into Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm in there looking at shoes and hands. I'm sitting in the back of the room, trying to be incognito. And you know, I hear a guy talk over here, and he says he's got 18 years of sobriety. And he says he got the first 10 in prison, and he'd been out for 8 years. And he said he had a wife and a couple kids. And I thought, my God, you know, I've been to county jail. I haven't done time like that. And I'm listening to him. This gal over here, she's got like a nurse's uniform on. And she said she was sober 8 years, and she said that she'd had her nurse's license yanked. She had 2 little girls at the time, and they yanked the little girls and gave them to the dad, and she couldn't see them unless it was supervised. And I had that kind of going on then in my life. And as sick as I was, I remember judging her, thinking, you're stealing drugs out of the hospital? They should have took your license. You know, idiot. But I'll tell you what she said. She said she got sober in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. She said she got herself a sponsor, started working steps, and started applying spiritual principles to her life and being of service to other alcoholics. And she said she got her nurse's license back, the 2 little girls back in her life, and she sounded like she's a productive member of society and had something going on. what happened to me that night was something that long vacated my life. For the very first time ever at that point, I got a little glimmer of something called hope that had been gone for a very long time in my life. You know, I heard people talking. You see, when I went to college, they didn't have Street Smart 101. I heard people listening and talking to what our book says in chapter 7, the first two words, practical experience. You know, if you're an alcoholic of my type and you're able to stay sober and live through the things I'll tell you in a minute that have happened to me in my life, let me tell you something. Those two words, practical experience, become golden nuggets you can use to save the lives of however many people God drops in front of you, and He will. They'll drop right in front of you to where you'll fall on your face going over them if you're not looking, if you're not connected, you know. What happened to me was this guy walked up to me after the meeting. He says, "You look new." I said, "I am." He said, "I'm George." That guy became my first sponsor, a guy named George Friend at the 502 Club, you know, and he was class of 66, you know, January 20th of 66, and I had all these characters running around, you know, Harvey, December 29th, 1957. I had my neighbor over there in Chino when I moved over there, John Kay. Mark and I, great friend. Harvey loved him, but he used to always talk crap to John because John was March 19th of 1957, so he had 9 months on Harvey, you know. But that's kind of how it rolled. I remember at Harv's 50th birthday party, it was at San Dimas, and I remember his sponsor, Clancy, was there. Clancy comes in there, and Harvey's talking about how he has more time than Clancy because Clancy got sober October 31st of 1958, and Clancy says, "Yeah, Harvey, this is at his 50th birthday party. 3 times the people in here." And he goes, "Yeah, Harvey, but when you were new and you were living in Santa Monica and you called me and you were up in your balcony of your apartment and you told me the Pacific Ocean was on fire," he said, "you got 3 years taken back, demoted for that." But these guys are all characters that, you know, the guys that have crossed our lives, I mean, the story is just some real. This George guy pulls out a book, takes me over, buys me a book. "Write your name in here." He writes your name in there. Bob Bro, 5/16/88. You know, I still have that book. The only thing I have better than that book is when my first sponsor, George, died, his family, who I was very close to, his wife, Mama Sponsor, I lovingly called her. I buried her last year. I did the eulogy at her service. And Kathy was April 1st of 1966. And they take me into this room, and these are all the books. Take whatever you want. So right next to my big book is George's big book. And it's funny because the same stuff's in the margins and highlighted. That was the book that took me through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous when I was in the first 6 months of sobriety. That's like gold to me. I mean, so George becomes my sponsor. These people are busier than hell in AA, and I'm running around doing stuff all over the place. You know, I remember I was a year sober. You're going to go talk over here. They got me running all over the place, you know. I didn't have time to think about me. You know, sobriety's gone on and on. It's been great. I've been all over the world in Alcoholics Anonymous. I got a wife. I'll tell you a little about her shortly. But, you know, a lot of stuff's happened. My first sponsor, George, died. I was 21 years sober. Killed me. It's 2009. It was July 14th of 2009. And it just passed. It was 15 years a couple weeks back. My second sponsor was the oldest guy he sponsored, a guy named Don Babb. And Don Babb, July 28th, last Sunday, that was 9 years since Don moved to the big meeting in the sky. And they called me up. I had to go over to the meeting in the morning on Sunday and talk because it was Don's anniversary of Don's death. I did that for his wife, Jackie. And third sponsor, you know, is a guy named Bob Lemke from Glendale. Bob sponsored me for 6 years. I'd known Bob the whole time I was sober. Me and him were close friends, and ends up he's my sponsor, you know. And then when I was 30 years sober, it was a Wednesday, or Tuesday or a Wednesday. Right before that was Mother's Day. I'm coming up on 30, right? And my little girl, Michelle, the one I had with ex number 1, calls me up. We're tight, you know. She's 36 years old. She's calling me. She says, "Dad," I said, "How you doing, honey? Happy Mother's Day." She says, "I'm in the hospital, Dad." And I said, "What's going on?" She just had twins. They were 7 months old or something. And she had a 2-year-old. She says, "I don't know, they think it might be from the pregnancy or something. I'm really anemic. They keep giving me transfusions. I'll be out of here by tomorrow maybe." And I go running over there. And this doctor comes by doing rounds, and he was a hematologist, but he wasn't hers. He was just a guy, and he looks at her, and he's talking to us, and he says, I'm not sure, he says, but it looks to me like you got something called multiple myeloma. Hell, I don't know what that is. Take out Google knows. I said, bone marrow cancer. I'm like, oh, shit. He goes, we need to verify that with a biopsy, a bone biopsy, and we'll do that. We'll do a bone aspiration tomorrow, Monday, when they're open downstairs. So Monday comes, and I get a call, and she says, it's positive. I got multiple myeloma, and it's high-risk multiple myeloma. And I'm like, oh, shit. High-risk multiple. Average life expectancy, 18 months. Oh, boy. So that was 2 days before my 30th Alcoholics Anonymous birthday, you know, and I've never been a slouch on the outside of AA. I've been buried in the middle since I was here. I never took a vacation to see how crazy I could get before I snapped. I didn't do any of that, but let me tell you what happened. 2 days later, you know, it's Wednesday, it's my birthday. I'm supposed to be over at Windsor Club giving a talk for my sponsor, Bob, because it was my birthday. He's going to give me a big-ass cake. And I went over there, and I had my car loaded up with a bunch of my guys and another car behind me there. And I get over there, and all these goofballs from my men's stagger, there's probably 20 guys. And I'm up there, and I'm trying to give a talk, man, and I'm hurting bad, like just hurting. I mean, it was oozing out of me, you know, and I did what I was supposed to do, exactly what I was supposed to do. And, you know, after that, we went all over the country. You know, I figured I'd use some of my money to fix this. I couldn't fix it. You know, they talk a lot about, you know, I talked a little about defeat tonight. You hear a lot of people talk about surrender. A defeat comes before any surrender. That's why there's this first step is defeat. 3 is your surrender. Well, try surrendering your child, you know. Try surrendering your child and try living with that kid in City of Hope and watching them drill in her and do all this crap to her. And little girls are running around. And I tell you what. People say, how'd you ever live through that? Because on October 25th, 19 months later, you know, she told me, she says, Dad, you're the only one I know that when the time comes, I said, what's the time to you, baby? She says, when I can't wipe myself, I don't want to be here no more. Do you understand that? And I said, yeah, I do. Time came, you know, and I said, make her comfortable, you know. And people say, what'd you do? You know, how'd you do that? And I says, I didn't do it. Me and God did it. You see, something's happened to me. There's this transformation that's taken place over the time I've been here. You know, God dropped me off in the parking lot of the 502 Club on that Tuesday night. God's here with me tonight. You know, I mean, I was 9 days ago. I was like the second plane out of Taiwan. A super typhoon hit 2 hours later, and I'm like, me and God, hey, no problem. We got this, right? Day-to-day operations. But that situation with my daughter, you know, it jolted me. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot about trusting and loving God. I learned a lot about leaning on my friends because I didn't know how to do that. I'm a giver. I don't like receiving. It's just how it is. And you know what happened was those two little girls, you know, I told my daughter those kids will never have anything they need that they'll want. And, you know, luckily she was married to a guy who's a great man, you know, and he got remarried now, and he's got a little boy that's going to be 2 next month. And today, I was with 4 of my grandchildren. That the oldest one, that was 2, almost 3. She's now, no, she was 3. She's 9. It was her birthday's tomorrow. You know, I was with them today. They're a huge part of my life. And you know, people say, how'd you do that? I'll tell you, I did it. It's real simple. 10, step 11, and step 12, over and over and over again. I wrote a lot. I'm a big writer guy. I wrote a lot. And after she was gone, I wrote a lot. While all that was going on, my sponsor got dementia so bad. I was one of the few people who even knew who they were, and he'd always see me say, how's Michelle doing, Bob? I remember when I had to tell him she wasn't here anymore. And it was about a year later, the oldest guy at that point I'd sponsored in 31 years. I'll tell you a little bit about him before I sit down here. He got ALS. And so I'm right off the heels of my daughter, and I'm over at my oldest sponsee since I was 8 months sober is over there dying of ALS, and he can't talk no more, and it's ugly. And I'm kissing him on the forehead saying goodbye to him. And I'm like, when's any of this going to stop? That was September. October the next month, on October, Bob died. You know, it's just like, I just kept, you know, doing what I'm doing. I can tell you something. For 2 years, I'd be out talking somewhere, And I couldn't tell you what I just told you. I've grown up a whole lot in the last 2 years. It's been 4 years now. And the first 2 years, the first time I tried it, because it's a huge part of my story, you know what I mean? It's a huge loss. The first time I tried to say it, I started like I thought I was going to either throw up on the podium or whatever. And I had to collect myself and go back at it. But so Bob dies, so they're boom, 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 boom. And I thought, okay, all right, God's got a plan for me. During this period of time, I can't tell you. And of course, I got another sponsor, Les A. You know, Les was sponsored by one of my A brothers and I knew, Ray, that sponsored a whole fleet of guys. Les was his oldest sponsee. Les is 40, he's class of 75. Me and him are stuck together. You know, that's the way I like it. I learned the value of being completely transparent with another human being a long time ago. I have no secrets. I have nothing to hide, you know. There's a lot of strength and power in that. But I hook up with this new guy and he's got me writing Les, and, you know, all this stuff's going on, and these people keep getting dropped in my path, you know. My wife's dying of this is going on. And then, hey, somebody told me to call you, and I'm talking to him. You know, my daughter's sick. Somebody said to call you. Yeah, all right. So there's a reason for some of this, you know. George used to say there's not a grain of sand out of place in the universe, and sometimes it's hard for me to digest that and understand that, but sometimes that seems to be the case. When I was 9 months sober, I was out at a place in Palm Desert called Fellowship Hall on Portola. It's still there. And I was sitting outside with Phil, the guy that died of ALS, and I was 9 months sober, and Phil was brand new. He had a month. And another guy named Jeff, and I don't know whatever happened to Jeff. There were three of us. You know, if you're new or fairly new to Alcoholics Anonymous, I strongly suggest hang around with the pack. Go around with the pack. You watch like National Geographic or something, you're going to see like the great migrations in Africa. You'll see like 500 like gazelles or something just cruising along, running real nice and beautiful. And over in the bushes, there's a leopard, and he's hungry, man. He's ready to go. He comes running out, and every time you know who he's going to he'll get the one on the outside. He never gets the ones in the middle. And that's where you need to be. That's where I try to stay. This is right dead center in the middle of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I'm out at Portola. I'm with these two guys. We're sitting outside. There's a patio. There wasn't in those days. It's February. It's President's Day weekend. Beautiful night. Stars are out. A lot of smoke in the room in those days. I'm sitting outside. The speaker's coming up. It's after the break. Phil, that guy that died of ALS, comes over. He's got a chair. He puts the chair down next to me. I says, Phil, what's that chair for? He goes, well, that's for your future wife. Now, I'm 9 months sober. I told you my current situation. I'm over in Superior Court with two of them at once, right? And I'm like, I looked at him. I can't repeat from the podium here what I said. It was something about his mother. But I look over to the doorway, right about where this guy's standing, and I see, oh, man. Yeah. I told you about that infrared crap. Oh, my God. And here comes this beautiful gal come walking over to me. She sits down next to me, and I'm like, what the hell? And she says, hi, my name's Lynn. I says, my name's Bob, you know. I'm checking this stuff. And I'm 9 months sober, and so I told her I had 11 months of sobriety. And she said she had 60 days. The truth is, she was 3 days out of Charter Long Beach, man. I'm telling you. I mean, my wife, last Sunday, I talked, you know, and my wife's sponsor, she's 90. Her name's Lynn R. She's sober for a long time. She's sitting right in front of me, and I look at her, I go, well, it wasn't a 13th step. Neither one of us had a year. Sick. And she comes up and she goes, your talk was so good, but only you could come up with some kind of bullshit like that, you know. So she sits down, you know, anyways, I get her number, and, you know, we go about our ways, and I go back to Covina. I go up to George. George is a couple inches taller than me, and he's a big guy. You know, when I got sober and I was new in AA, I weighed 134 pounds. I didn't need a rear view mirror. I was so sucked up I could see out of the back of my head. I'm all sucked up. I used to think I was like cut, right? I was just sucked up. I'm over talking to George, and I'm like, George, I met this gal. She's gorgeous. And he just stood there looking at me. I'm a salesman, so I talk a little louder. You know, George, I met this gal out in the desert. I mean, she's gorgeous. You got to see her. He's just looking at me. I'm thinking, man, I got to step up my game. I look at him and I said, George, I met this gal out in the desert. I think God sent her to me, and she is drop dead gorgeous. That got his attention. He looks at me, he goes, Bobby. He goes, first off, God's not a pimp. And he said, second off, you don't know how to treat a woman anyway. You've proven it again and again and again. And he goes, what are you going to do with her? He says, where's she live? And I says, well, she goes to meetings at that Dunsmore Club, the oldest club this side of the Mississippi. He goes, isn't that about an hour away? And I said, yeah. He says, good for her. Not nice. So we start dating. I haven't always followed direction. But, we'd go to meeting, go to pie. We'd go out and eat dinner and go to a meeting. By the time 3.5 years sober comes around, she moves in my house. I lived in Glendora then. And, her and I have been together over 35 years now. My wife's 35 years sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I get guys call me all the time. I told you, romance and finance. You know what she did? I said, whoa. I said, you're talking to a guy that's been married 3 times, and that's only the ones I'm married. Are you sure you want to tell me this? And they laugh, and I says, but I've learned how to do things differently. And what's happened over the years is my ability to exist with other people, my ability, it came from you guys. Really, come on. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I was scared, and I was frightened and didn't know what that looked like. I didn't know how to have fun. You guys taught me how to laugh. I sat in a meeting one night, and Rosemary R. was talking up at that Friday night meeting, and I laughed so hard my sides hurt. And I learned to laugh again. And I didn't know how to live, couldn't live sober, and I watched what you did. I jumped in the back pocket of a man I called a sponsor, watched what he did and put a smile on his face. Watch how he treated his wife, because I didn't know how to do that. Watch how he treated his children. I even got to go to his work and see how he treated his employees. I learned, and I watched. I learned how to live. I learned how to be sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. We're not a glum lot. I learned how to go out and have fun. The most important thing that happened to me, and it's been my experience over there, is I learned how to love, and I came here and I hated myself. I didn't know how to receive love. I didn't know how to act when somebody did a loving thing to me. I didn't know what that felt like. But by being of service in Alcoholics Anonymous, by doing things that were extremely inconvenient a lot, I learned how to give without measure. And I learned how to, most importantly, not keep score. And my life began to flourish. I started to know what love felt like, and I keep giving it out. And I believe that love's our ability to touch the souls of the people who come in here broken. That's what happens. And, when I was 10 years sober, I was over at a prison over on Euclid in Chino, Herman Stark. And these kids, it was California. We got we have 3 prisons in Chino now. We used to have 4. And I was over there, and I was in there that night. And I was in the back in S&T, and I don't remember who was supposed to show up, but none of them did. I was in there solo. I'd walk across the yard with this little panic button thing they used to give me. And I'd be back in the room. There's like 25, 30 of these young men, and they were like 18 to 22 years old, and they're in there. And I'm in there telling them what it used to be like and what happened and what it's like now. And the doors, boom, and they're going to go back to their little 8x10s that they called home. And they're all going that way, and this young man's walking right at me. And I'm thinking, uh-oh, I'm going to have to start bobbing and weaving, What did I say to piss him off? And he walked up to me, and he goes, hi, Bob, how are you? And he said, I'm doing good. He says, I don't know if you remember me. He says, but do you still got that big white dog? When I got sober, I had a big Samoyed. I'm like, who is this dude, right? And he goes, I go, ha. He said, when I was 13 years old, you were a year sober and you were going into Fred C. Nellis on Whittier Boulevard in Madison Cottage. And I used to go in there a lot. And what it used to be like, what happened was like now. And he said, in the winter, you'd have hair on you and you'd be talking about the dog you had. And so it was all true. He knew me. And he says, I'm 23. Now, I got to be honest, I didn't recognize this guy, this young man. He says, I'm going to get out of here in a couple of weeks, and I'm going to go back to the old neighborhood. And he goes, I really think I need to do this A&A thing. And I said, if you're alcoholic like me, yeah, it's probably a good idea. He goes, I know what's going to happen when I get there, and my homeboys, he goes, it's done. He goes, I can't do that shit anymore. And I says, I know. He says, you've been sober 10 years. He said, I only got one question for you. And I says, what's that? And he says, how long do you have to do this for? He says, you come in here with these guys you sponsor, you come in here all tan, look like you got off some beach in France, and maybe I did. It don't matter, but you're in here. That's all I knew, I was in there. And he says, but how long do you have to do this for? And I looked at him, and I said, if you walk down to the corner every day and somebody handed you the keys to the kingdom that made anything possible, would you go down to the corner tomorrow? He goes, well, hell yeah. And I looked at him and I said, now you know why I'm here tonight. Thank you.